My husband learned I was pregnant, and instead of smiling or touching my stomach or asking whether I was all right, he looked straight at me and said, "That baby is not mine." Then he ordered me out of our house before nightfall. I spent the first night in my car with a tiny ultrasound picture on the passenger seat. By morning, an estate lawyer from across the country was telling me my first husband had died and left me $84 million, but only if I met one condition. My name is Emily Bennett, and for 7 years I was married to Mark Bennett. We lived in a 3-bedroom house on the north side of Charlotte, in one of those neighborhoods where every mailbox matched and people smiled while judging the state of your shrubs. I worked as an architect for a regional design firm. Mark brokered commercial property deals. From the outside, we looked solid, comfortable, successful, the sort of couple neighbors described as lucky. The outside was wrong. People like to say you know when a marriage is ending. They describe long silences, cold bedrooms, the small shift in how a spouse turns away. Maybe that is true when you are watching from a distance. Inside the marriage, it is easier to rename every warning. You call it stress. You call it work. You tell yourself love is patient, and patience becomes the place where the truth hides. I can see the first warning clearly now, though I ignored it at the time. About 11 months before everything broke open, Mark began taking phone calls in the garage. One evening, I came home late from checking a construction site. His SUV was parked outside, the kitchen was lit, but the house felt empty. I found him beside a rack of paint cans and old tennis gear, his phone tight against his ear, speaking so softly I could not catch a full sentence. When he noticed me, he lifted one finger, telling me to wait. After he hung up, he came inside, kissed my forehead, and said it had been a tenant problem. I accepted that answer because I wanted it to be true. Then I noticed the cash. Mark had always managed our shared account. Early in the marriage, it had seemed practical because his schedule changed more than mine. But around that same period, there were withdrawals I could not place. $260, $420, smaller amounts that always came out during workdays. When I asked about them over dinner, he smiled with that patient expression he used when he wanted me to feel unreasonable. He said he had been paying for client lunches, parking garages, tips, quick errands. "You know I never save receipts," he told me. I let it pass. That was another thing I learned later. Letting something pass can become a habit. One unanswered question makes the next one easier to swallow. I was busy, tired, and determined not to become the kind of wife who checks receipts and interrogates every errand. Mark knew that about me. He used my pride in being reasonable as cover. The garage calls kept happening. The cash kept disappearing. And Mark developed a new habit that seemed casual until I looked back at it later. He began asking about my past, especially about Daniel Mercer. Daniel had been my first husband. We married when I was 26 and he was 34, and 5 years later we divorced without a war. No children, no screaming matches, no dramatic betrayal. We were simply two people who had started in the same direction and ended up wanting different lives. After the divorce, he moved to Seattle, built a software company, and slowly vanished from my world. I had not spoken with him in 12 years. So when Mark asked, "Whatever happened to your first husband?" The computer guy. I thought he was being nosy, but he brought Daniel up more than once. 3 times in 7 weeks. Each time he hid the question inside something else. A joke, a memory, a comment about how people from our past sometimes turned up again. I assumed it was jealousy. Maybe insecurity. I promised myself I would suggest counseling when things calmed down, and then I went on with my life. I was 9 weeks pregnant when Mark showed me who he really was. I had taken 2 home tests before my doctor confirmed it. I was frightened, but underneath the fear was a joy so bright I could barely look at it. Mark and I had not been carefully trying for a baby, but we had not been preventing one either. I believed we both wanted a family. That belief was one of the costliest mistakes I ever made. On a Wednesday evening, I came home carrying a small blue gift bag. Inside was a folded newborn onesie that said future designer with the ultrasound photo tucked beneath the tissue paper. I remember the sound of the bag sliding across the kitchen island. I remember Mark opening it. I remember his hands going still. He looked at the onesie, then at the ultrasound, then placed both on the counter as if they were evidence in a case he had already decided. When he lifted his eyes to mine, there was no shock in them. No confusion. Only cold certainty. "That baby is not mine," he said. At first, I laughed because my brain could not make any other sound. I thought I had misunderstood him. I thought maybe he was making some awful joke. But Mark did not blink. He said it again. He said he had known for months that I was cheating. He said I had made a fool of him. He said I needed to leave that house before the night was over. I tried to talk. I tried to reach for his arm. He stepped away from me as though my hand were dirty. By 8:50 p.m., I was parked behind a Greenway Market 3 miles from my own home. The gift bag was on the passenger seat. The ultrasound picture had slipped halfway out of the tissue. I sat there in the dark, staring through the windshield, trying to understand how a man could hear that his wife was carrying a child and immediately decide the child could not be his. He had not asked how far along I was. He had not asked whether I had seen a doctor. He had not even pretended to wonder. He went straight to certainty, and certainty that fast has roots. I did not have the answer yet, but some quiet part of me, colder than grief, had already started searching for it. I slept in the car that night, though sleep is too generous a word. I stayed in the driver's seat with the heater running in short bursts because February in Charlotte tricks you during the afternoon and then bites after sunset. I did not sob the way people do in movies. For a long time, I did not cry at all. I just watched ordinary life happen a few yards away. People came out of the market with grocery bags. A father argued softly with a little boy over candy. A woman balanced flowers and paper towels against her hip while unlocking her car. Their lives were only 20 feet from mine, but they might as well have been behind glass. Around midnight, I counted what I had. My personal checking account held about $520. Most of my savings had gone into the joint account over the last 3 years, because Mark said it made mortgage payments and taxes simpler. My laptop was still in the house, along with my passport, my social security card, my drafting tablet, and an external drive containing years of work. My health insurance was through Mark's employer because during a 9-month independent contract stretch, staying on his plan had seemed easier. So there I was, 9 weeks pregnant, no access to savings, no independent insurance, no documents, no computer, and no key to any door that did not depend on the husband who had just thrown me out. The practical facts steadied me more than the emotional ones. Panic is foggy. Numbers are clean. I wrote them on the back of an old gas receipt. Account balance, weeks pregnant, documents missing, calls to make. My life had been reduced to a short list, and somehow that made it possible to move. And then I thought about Daniel Mercer. Mark had asked about him 3 times. Mark was not sentimental. He did not wander through old stories because he missed the romance of the past. Mark researched. He tracked. He had spent 2 decades in commercial real estate learning how to spot value before anyone else knew it was there. If he had been asking about Daniel, it was not because he felt threatened by an ex-husband I had not seen in years. It was because he had found something. I took out my phone and searched Daniel's name for the first time in a very long while. His company, a business software firm based in Seattle, had been purchased by a larger tech group almost 4 years earlier. The sale price was not listed, but the buyer was big enough that the number could not have been small. There were a few business articles, an abandoned professional profile, and then almost nothing. After the sale, Daniel seemed to have stepped out of public view. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. What had Mark found? And how long had he been hiding it from me? At 5:30 in the morning, I drove to a 24-hour diner on Central Avenue and ordered eggs and coffee I could barely swallow. I sat in a booth beside the window while the sky turned pale over the parking lot. By the time the first real breakfast crowd came in, I had something that was not yet a plan, but it had bones. First, I had to get my belongings out of the house. My identification, my work materials, my laptop, my hard drive. They belonged to me. Mark could make it difficult, but he could not make them his. Second, I needed legal advice immediately. Not later, not when I felt stronger. I needed someone to tell me what rights I had in the house, what Mark could and could not do with the joint account, and whether he had any legal right to lock me out of a home with both our names on the mortgage. Third, I needed medical care under my own name. I was pregnant, I was uninsured for the moment, and I could not let fear delay that. Fourth, and this was the piece that felt strange but necessary, I needed to know what Mark knew about Daniel. Because if my husband had been watching my former husband's finances before the marriage exploded, then the accusation in the kitchen had not been a burst of anger. It had been a move. That distinction mattered. Anger burns out. Strategy keeps going. If Mark had planned this, then every conversation from the past months had to be treated as evidence, not memory. Why would a man invent an affair and throw out a pregnant wife? The answer was ugly, but it made the room around me feel sharper, because he wanted her gone before something happened that might give her control over something he wanted. I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug. I am not a foolish woman. My work is built on reading plans, finding the stress points, knowing which beams carry weight and which walls only look important. I realized I could read my marriage the same way. Mark had seen an event coming, something connected to Daniel. The pregnancy had not created Mark's plan, it had only rushed it. And because he rushed, he had made mistakes. I left money on the table, pulled on my coat, and walked out into the cold morning steadier than I expected to be. Not safe, not calm, but steady, like a structure that has finally settled onto its foundation. In my contacts, I found Rebecca Lawson, a family lawyer I had met through 2 professional mixers. Months earlier, she had asked me a few questions about renovating a small office suite. It was barely 7:00 a.m., but I texted her anyway. "Rebecca, this is Emily Bennett. I need an urgent consultation about my marriage. I am sorry to write so early." She answered 9 minutes later. "I can clear 8:30. Be here by 8:20. Her office was on the 12th floor of a building in South Park, one I had driven past countless times without noticing. Her assistant met me near the elevator and showed me into a compact conference room that smelled of coffee and paper. I was still wearing the clothes from the day before. I had bought a travel toothbrush and a clean shirt at a drugstore, but that was the best I could do. Rebecca walked in at 8:30 exactly, set a legal pad on the table, and looked at me with the steady face of someone who had heard terrible stories and knew better than to react too quickly. "Tell me everything," she said. "Do not protect him and do not shorten it for my comfort." So I told her the garage calls, the cash, Daniel's name, the pregnancy, the kitchen, the parking lot. She wrote without interrupting. When I finished, 26 minutes had passed. She put down her pen. No one in that room tried to comfort me with empty phrases. That helped. I did not need someone to tell me everything would be all right. I needed someone to show me the next legal step and then the one after that. Rebecca understood the difference. "The house is in both names?" "Yes." "Then he cannot simply ban you from it. If he changed locks, we handle that immediately. Now the joint account. Do you know whether money moved after he forced you out?" I did not. "Check now," she said. I opened the banking app with hands I expected to shake. They did not. 2 days earlier, the joint account had held a little over $38,600. The balance on the screen was $58. "He emptied it," I said. Rebecca's face did not change, but her pen started moving again. "Time stamps." There were 4 transfers between 9:36 and 10:00 for the night before, all into an account I did not recognize. "That is dissipation of marital assets," she said. "It gives us a strong reason to seek an order freezing further movement. How long have you lived in North Carolina during the marriage?" "The whole time." "Then equitable distribution applies. He does not get to move marital money into a hiding place and call it finished." She flipped a page. "Now talk to me about Daniel Mercer." I told her what little I knew and what I had found in the parking lot. She listened more carefully than ever. You believe your current husband discovered something about your former husband's estate or finances, she said, and pushed you out before you could learn about it. Is that right? I think it is possible. It is more than possible as a theory, she said. It gives him motive, that matters. After you leave, contact an estate attorney, not a general lawyer, someone who handles trusts, wills, and beneficiary disputes. You need to learn whether Daniel Mercer named you in anything: a trust, a will, an insurance policy, an account. You may not be able to get answers directly, but an estate lawyer can ask the right questions. She told me to document everything. Texts, call records, bank screenshots, the transfer details, anything Mark sent, anything he said. She also told me not to answer long emotional messages if he sent them, not to speak to him alone, and not to let shame make me tidy up the story for anyone else. She asked whether I had an email account he did not know about. I did, an old one from before I married him. Use only that, Rebecca said. Starting now. I left her office just after 10 with a folder in my hand and direction in my body. I sat in the parking garage and worked down the list. I emailed the bank records to the old account. I photographed every transfer. I sent the bank a message Rebecca had helped me phrase, disputing the transfers and requesting that the account be flagged because of pending legal action. Then I searched for Daniel's family. I had not spoken with them since our divorce, but I remembered his younger sister, Hannah Mercer. She had always been kind to me in a quiet, observant way. I found her on social media. Same face, older now, gentler around the eyes. I sent one careful message. I was Emily, Daniel's ex-wife, and I had reason to believe I might need to speak with someone about his estate. I apologized for appearing out of nowhere. She called 45 minutes later. Emily, she said, and her voice was soft. Daniel died in October, a stroke. He was 49. The parking garage seemed to tilt. I didn't know, I said. His attorneys have been trying to find you. How did no one reach you? I could not answer that. Hannah continued. He never married again. Near the end, he mentioned you more than once. He said you were the only person who had loved him before money made everyone strange. His estate attorney is Nathan Whitaker in Seattle. You need to call him today. After she hung up, I sat without moving. Daniel had been dead for 4 months. His attorneys had been looking for me. Mark had asked questions about him. Mark had moved money out of our account less than an hour after forcing me out. He had known, not guessed. Known. Maybe he saw a business notice, maybe a contact mentioned it, maybe he searched on purpose. However he learned it, he had spent months calculating from information I did not even have. Then I came home with a pregnancy announcement, and his timeline collapsed. He acted too fast. That was when the marriage truly ended for me. Not in the kitchen, not in the parking lot. It ended in that garage under fluorescent lights, when I understood that Mark had not merely abandoned me. He had tried to remove me from my own life before I knew what was happening. I called Nathan Whitaker's Seattle office. His assistant put me on hold for several minutes. When Nathan came on the line, his voice sounded professional, cautious, and unmistakably relieved. Mrs. Bennett, he said, I am glad you reached out. There is a significant matter involving Daniel Mercer's estate. You are named as a beneficiary. How significant? Approximately $84 million, he said. There is, however, one condition. I sat there, staring at a painted number on a concrete pillar, level 2. It felt absurd that the world would give me something so ordinary to look at, while my life rearranged itself around a number that large. Nathan explained that Daniel had placed most of his assets into a revocable trust, proceeds from the company's sale, investment accounts, and several properties. The condition was not meant to exclude me. It was meant to verify me. I had to appear in person at Nathan's Seattle law office within 75 days of formal notification to sign identity documents and beneficiary confirmation forms. Daniel, Nathan said, had been cautious about fraud. Anyone could claim to be a former spouse from far away. He wanted me physically present because he believed the real me would come, and an opportunist would not. He updated the trust 10 months before he died, Nathan added. You were listed from the first version, but the amendment increased the amount after the last company payments cleared. Could anyone have found out about the trust? I asked. There was a pause. The detailed terms are private, but the existence of certain planning documents can sometimes be inferred from business filings, probate avoidance records, and professional connections. A motivated person with resources might piece together enough to suspect something. There is a reason I am asking, I said. I told him about Mark, the timing, the accusation, the account transfers. Nathan did not interrupt. When I finished, he said, "Please make sure your family attorney protects this inheritance as your separate property. Do not allow funds to pass through any account your husband can touch. Since you are still married, the way this is handled matters." I understand. I met with counsel this morning. Good, he said. Come to Seattle as soon as you can. I flew there 5 days later. Before I left, Rebecca secured a temporary order on the joint account and sent a formal notice to Mark's lawyer stating that I had the right to enter the marital home to retrieve personal belongings. A sheriff's deputy came with me. Mark was there. He stood by the kitchen entrance while I packed my documents, laptop, hard drive, clothes, and work files. He did not yell. He did not apologize. He watched me with a blank, calculating expression I had never seen directed so openly at me before. His mother was sitting at the breakfast table. Carol Bennett was 68, narrow-shouldered, white-haired, and polished in the way some people become when they have practiced appearing harmless for decades. She had never liked me, though she had always made sure to dislike me politely. She did it through small things: surprise when I described a difficult project, little corrections to stories Mark and I told together, comments that sounded like concern until you heard the edge. I had long understood that Carol was not background noise in Mark's life. She was one of the engines. Mark was clever, but Carol sharpened him. She had been doing it since he was a boy. As I carried out the final box, she spoke. "Emily," she said in a pleasant voice, "you are making this far worse than it needs to be." I kept walking. In Seattle, Nathan's firm occupied 2 floors of a glass building near Pioneer Square. His assistant offered me water with the exact careful politeness people use when they know the amount of money on the table. The signing process took almost 3 hours. Identity checks, review of trust provisions, verification of my divorce from Daniel, and legal acknowledgement of my current marital status. Nathan explained the release schedule. About $9.5 million would become available within 25 days. The rest would come over 16 months, while investments and properties were transferred or sold in an orderly way. He warned me again that the funds should never touch any account tied to Mark, not even briefly, and he arranged for separate trust-controlled transfers while Rebecca reviewed the marital property language from Charlotte. I flew back to Charlotte the next evening with copies of every signed page in my bag and a separate digital backup already sent to Rebecca. The following morning, while I was standing in the kitchen of my friend Lauren Miller's apartment, my phone rang from a number I did not know. A man's voice said, "Emily, I know people close to Mark. I'm just calling as a courtesy. Women who push things like this sometimes find that their professional lives become messy. You're licensed, right? Architecture boards look into complaints. Employers get nervous when scandal follows someone." He paused, waiting for fear to fill the space. I said, "I am recording this now. State your name." The call ended. I called Rebecca, then Nathan. Both told me the same thing: an anonymous threat aimed at my professional license made during active litigation was not a small mistake. The phone metadata would exist. Rebecca filed a harassment motion by Monday afternoon. On Tuesday, Mark's attorney called Rebecca asking whether we might consider a more cooperative path. Rebecca told me later with unmistakable satisfaction in her voice. "They assumed you would be frightened and alone," she said. "They did not expect you to have lawyers in place before they started squeezing." "They will try something else," I said. "Almost certainly. Eat, sleep, keep your records clean. You will need the steadiness." So for a few days, I did exactly that. Lauren had given me her spare room within hours of my first call, and she never once made me feel like a burden. We had been friends since graduate school, bonded over terrible campus coffee, and the ability to argue about building codes longer than any normal person should. I walked in Freedom Park in the mornings. I bought soup from a corner cafe. I read a mystery novel I had carried around for 2 years without opening. I let my body remember that it was carrying a child, not just a legal case. My first appointment with a new OB under an insurance plan Rebecca helped me arrange was on a Thursday. The heartbeat was strong. The doctor said everything looked right. I sat in the clinic parking lot afterward and felt, for about 10 minutes, something close to peace. Then Mark's formal offer arrived. His attorney, Martin Keene, sent Rebecca a letter proposing mediation. Attached was a settlement proposal. Mark would not contest the divorce. He would not fight the freeze on the joint account. He would, the letter said, generously agree not to challenge my separate property claim to Daniel's inheritance. In return, I would drop the harassment motion, accept a smaller share of the marital assets, and sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing me from discussing the circumstances of the separation with anyone. I read it twice. Rebecca was blunt when I called her. He is trying to buy your silence. The non-disclosure clause is the point. The money terms are bad for you, but the real goal is keeping the facts out of the record. The fact that he watched Daniel's estate before he threw me out, I said. Exactly. For a man in commercial real estate, reputation matters. A court file showing that he researched his wife's ex-husband's estate, accused her of cheating while she was pregnant, emptied a joint account, and then tried to intimidate her would hurt him badly. So we decline. We decline without a counteroffer, she said. That tells them you are not bargaining for quiet. You want a full accounting. I will not pretend the offer meant nothing to me. A tired, pregnant woman living in a friend's spare room can look at a number on paper and wonder whether peace is something you can purchase with silence. I sat on Lauren's couch for nearly an hour with that thought while rain clicked against the windows. Then I set it down. The offer was not meant to help me. It was meant to protect Mark. And perhaps even more, it was meant to protect Carol. Someone had spent months looking into Daniel Mercer's estate. Mark was calculating, yes, but he was not patient in that particular way. He handled properties and leases. Quiet research into my former husband's family, finances, and legal arrangements required time, trust, and a willingness to operate in the background. Carol had all three. I called Hannah Mercer and asked one careful question. Had anyone contacted her after Daniel died, asking about the estate or about me? She was silent long enough for me to know the answer before she said it. A woman called in December, Hannah said. She claimed she was writing a feature about founders after acquisitions. She asked whether Daniel had left any major gifts. I did not tell her much. I thought it was strange, but not dangerous. The number had a Charlotte area code. That was enough. That evening, Lauren came home and found legal papers spread across her kitchen table. She made pasta, poured herself wine and me sparkling water, and sat across from me. Tell me where we are, she said. I told her everything. The estate, Mark's offer, the threat to my license, Hannah's call with the fake journalist. Lauren listened without interrupting. When I finished, she twirled pasta around her fork and said, So his mother probably found out before he kicked you out. They thought if they pushed you out fast, they could control whatever was coming. I think so, but if Daniel named you directly, Mark could not have gotten it anyway. I do not think they understood the scale. Maybe they thought it was smaller. Maybe they thought fear would make me sign whatever they put in front of me. And then you got pregnant, Lauren said, which made their messy plan urgent. I nodded. What do you need from me? Maybe a witness. Someone who can say when I arrived here, what condition I was in, what I had with me. The timeline matters. Done, she said immediately. I looked at her across the table and almost cried then, not from sadness, but from the relief of being believed without being asked to perform pain. I knew Mark and Carol were watching from across the city. I also knew their next move would not come in a formal letter. Carol came on a Sunday. She called Lauren's number, which I had never given her. That meant Mark had found it. She asked if she could come by just to talk. She said please in a voice so soft it sounded borrowed. I thought for half a minute. If I refused, I learned nothing. If I agreed, she might reveal something. She arrived at 11 carrying a tin of homemade shortbread. The gesture was so carefully chosen to make her look harmless that I almost respected the craft of it. She sat in Lauren's living room, declined coffee, and looked around the apartment as if making an inventory without moving her eyes too much. "I want to apologize for Mark," she said, "for how badly this has gone." I said nothing. He panicked. The business has been under pressure, and when you told him about the baby, he reacted in a way he regrets. He is devastated, Emily, truly. I folded my hands and let her keep talking. "This does not have to become a war. You have 7 years together. And now there is a child. A child deserves a father, a whole family. Think about what this fight will do to your baby." There it was, soft voice, sharp blade. "And the inheritance?" I asked. She paused for less than a second. It was enough. "That is not part of your marriage," she said. "That is a private legal matter." "Carol, did you call Hannah Mercer pretending to be a journalist?" Something moved across her face and vanished. "I have no idea what you mean." "I think you do." Her warmth returned, adjusted slightly. "I am asking you as the grandmother of your unborn child to stop before you destroy what can still be repaired. Mark is willing to go to counseling. He is willing to forgive. All he asks is that you put this other matter aside. It is complicating his business relationships. People are talking. He wants me to drop the motions and sign an NDA. He wants his wife back." I stared at her. The white hair, the careful blouse, the cookie tin on the table. A woman who had spent a lifetime learning that kindness could be used as a leash. "Carol," I said, "I know about the bank transfers. I know Mark researched Daniel's estate. I know someone called Hannah. My attorney knows it. The court has already seen enough to freeze assets. So you can tell Mark my answer is no. It was no yesterday, it is no today, and it will be no next week. If anyone contacts my employer, my witnesses, my doctors, or my attorneys again, Rebecca will file additional motions before the day ends." Carol's smile disappeared. Not faded, disappeared. The woman underneath was dry, cold, and exact. "You are choosing the wrong enemy," she said. "I already had an enemy," I said. "Now at least I know her name." She stood, picked up the shortbread, and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned back. "You have no idea what kind of family you are dealing with." Then she left. My hands shook after the door closed. I had controlled my face for 20 minutes and my body was only catching up. I was afraid of Carol. It would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. She had money, connections, patience, and decades of practice finding weak points in other people. But fear did not make me want to retreat. It made me want to finish. I called Rebecca. I had recorded the entire visit. North Carolina permits one-party consent recording, and Rebecca listened to the audio before saying one word. "Excellent," she said. Then I called Nathan, who confirmed that the first release from Daniel's trust would clear within the week. Afterward, I opened the small notebook where I had begun keeping dates, calls, and decisions. At the top of a blank page, I wrote, "They are afraid. Use that." Discovery began in March. Rebecca requested financial records, phone logs, messages, and computer history going back 26 months. Mark's attorney objected to nearly everything. The judge overruled most of it. What came back did not surprise me, but seeing it assembled was different from suspecting it. Mark had first searched Daniel Mercer's name the previous May. The search history came from his work laptop, which Martin Keene had tried and failed to keep out. Mark opened an article about Daniel's company's sale, Daniel's professional profile, and the website of a Seattle estate firm with a public page about revocable trusts. Carol's phone records showed a 19-minute call in December to a number registered to Hannah Mercer. That matched the fake journalist call. The records also showed 13 calls between Carol and Mark during the 3 days before he threw me out. Then there was the email. Mark had written from his personal account to Martin Keene's private address the Friday before the kitchen confrontation. The message said he needed the situation resolved before the Seattle lawyers reach me. He knew days before I told him I was pregnant. He had been planning. The baby had not caused his suspicion. The baby had complicated his strategy. Reading that email was strange. The language was so plain that it almost felt insulting. No coded phrase, no careful distance, just a man discussing my life as a problem to solve before I could be reached by lawyers. I sat with the paper in my hands and realized he had counted on me never seeing the sentence that explained him. The deposition happened on a Tuesday morning in April, in the same conference room where Rebecca had first told me to check the bank account. 4 months earlier, I had sat there in dirty clothes with nowhere to sleep. Now I sat beside my lawyer with a binder full of documents and a child moving lightly inside me. Mark sat across the table in a charcoal suit. He looked composed but not relaxed. It was the look of a man who had practiced neutrality in the mirror. The first part was procedural. He answered slowly. He said, "I do not recall," so often it began to sound less like memory and more like a hiding place. He avoided my eyes, then overcorrected and looked at me too directly. Both versions felt rehearsed. I knew the real Mark, the one who tapped 2 fingers against a table when numbers were running in his head. He was doing it that morning under the edge of the conference table. Then Rebecca reached the email. She placed a printed copy in front of him without drama. "Mr. Bennett, do you recognize this message?" Mark glanced down. One muscle moved in his jaw. "It appears to be from my account. Did you write it?" "I may have." "The message refers to the Seattle lawyers reaching E. Who is E?" Martin objected. Rebecca rephrased. "Were you aware before October 18 that your wife was named in Daniel Mercer's estate documents?" The silence lasted 5 seconds. I counted every one. "I had heard there could be paperwork," Mark said. "Yes or no, Mr. Bennett?" Martin touched Mark's sleeve. Mark stared at the paper. "I declined to answer." Rebecca's voice stayed pleasant. "Your refusal is noted for the record." Mark looked at his lawyer, and in that glance I saw the whole structure shift. He understood that the story he had built was no longer standing. Not because I shouted, not because I begged, because the documents carried more weight than he expected them to. Then he looked at me. I had imagined that moment many times. I thought I would feel triumph, rage, grief, maybe all of them tangled together. Instead, I felt clear, almost light. Like I had been standing under a ceiling I thought would crush me and suddenly realized which beams were holding. I did not say a word. He looked away first. In the elevator afterward, Rebecca said, "He settles before trial." "Yes," I said, and I knew she was right. Mark settled 12 days later. The agreement was 26 pages. He gave up any claim, now or ever, to Daniel's estate and acknowledged it as my separate property. He repaid the full $38,600 from the joint account with interest. Because of the asset dissipation and bad faith conduct, I received 63% of the marital estate, the house equity, a share of investments, and part of his business holdings. There was no non-disclosure agreement. I signed nothing that required me to protect his reputation. That mattered more than I expected. Money could rebuild my choices, but silence would have made his version of events the only one allowed to breathe. I refused to trade the truth for convenience. A prenatal DNA test at 13 weeks had already established paternity. Mark was the biological father. The result became part of the settlement file. His first accusation, the sentence that put me in a parking lot with no place to sleep, had been false from the start. The first disbursement from Daniel's trust arrived on a Wednesday morning. I was standing in Lauren's kitchen when the notification appeared on my phone. I stared at the number for a long time, then texted Lauren 2 words. It cleared. She replied with so many exclamation points I laughed for the first time in weeks. I called Hannah and told her the legal part was finally resolved. She was quiet, then said, "Daniel would be relieved. He really would." Mark signed the final divorce papers on a Thursday. He did not look at me across the table. I did not try to make him. There was nothing left in his face that I needed to read. The proof had already spoken for both of us. When I drove away through Charlotte traffic, my daughter moved inside me for the first time, a small clear flutter like someone knocking from the other side of a wall. I placed one hand on my stomach. "I know," I whispered. "I'm here too." Her name is Sophie. She was born in August, 6 pounds 12 ounces, with Mark's dark eyes and my refusal to give way. The house is mine now, but I sold it and bought a smaller one with better light, a safer street, and room for a garden. Mark sees Sophie according to the custody schedule. Carol is not welcome in my home. The last document I signed was not the divorce decree. It was the form opening a new architecture practice under my own name. I signed it with Sophie asleep beside me in her carrier, Daniel's trust protected in accounts Mark could never touch, and every page of what he and Carol had done preserved exactly where my lawyer told me to keep it. Then I locked the office door, carried my daughter into the afternoon sun, and went home.